Hey, I'm Decathlon neighbor. Welcome back to Zwift Fitness Journey. I'm just kicking off things. I'm getting ready just in time yet again for second ride in a row here. Fortunately today I'm on the right road bike. At least didn't have to change that. I think I mentioned it in a couple of my other videos, not necessarily here on Zwift as of yet, but in a couple of my other videos. So, small business, daycare. My wife and I work together with that, but we do have an employee, and that employee is moving to Arizona, and today happens to be her final day. And we've been fairly active, fairly busy in trying to get somebody new hired, which we have, but they don't start for a week and a half, and I'm gonna have a bit of chaos. So today I'm actually trying to get in one fairly lengthy ride before we sorry, I lost my train of thought. Before we get too chaotic, because I think short rides is all I'm going to manage for the next couple of weeks. I certainly intend to have those rides still, but they're definitely going to have to be short. Maybe I'll finally, somewhere, maybe next Wednesday or something, do some high intensity individual training for the first time here on Zwift. Well, anyway, so today the topic, Formula One. So we're continuing on with our sports mini series. One or two more episodes after this one that we'll be doing, and today we get into Formula One. So I'll begin with my background, which of course I got a brief discussion of this in the overall sports episode a couple episodes back, and in that one, for me, Formula One started as something I didn't even know existed, never even heard of it, and I had picked up a game for PlayStation, the original PlayStation, and it was a Formula One game. Didn't know, it was a racing game. Actually, I might have even mistaken it for IndyCar when I first picked it up. Either way, I was excited to have a racing game, and I basically learned how to drive while playing that game. Learned the quartering concepts and speeding up, slowing down, and all of those basics. So anyway, I logged a lot of hours on there. Fell in love with a sport that I knew nothing about, but then it went right back into that back burner of not seeing or hearing from it again for a very long period of time. And to be honest with you, just kind of skipping forward quite a bit, I did not get I didn't get access to appropriate F1 content until after I lived abroad as an adult, and just in the last, 9 years now, have I been able, no, not even that, maybe 7 years now, 2014, hybrid era, start of the hybrid era, 2014 is when I was able to see that, oh hey look, Formula One, TV in the US, wow, amazing. And ever since. Let's go ahead and get to that discussion though, and meanwhile I'm going to do the ride. You might get some additional outside noise because here it's morning still, and the weather's incredible. It's summer weather in spring, something we don't get around here, and it's beautiful, it's nice. It's also a bit warm already, so got my fan on, I have my window open. We'll see how we do with this nice long ride today. This is a group that I've been with once before. The very first group ride I did was with this group, so we're getting our second chance with them. Now, that first ride, I hung with the group till pretty late. There was a couple short climbs, and the pace of the group was way faster than what it's supposed to be, the 1.3 to 1.5, and I didn't quite keep up through there. I was with the back end of the group like I am right now, and the group became disconnected and I had to cover the gap pretty much alone, and I actually had help from somebody, one of the sweepers of the group, helped bring me back up, but the pace had lifted again as soon as we got there, and I hung with for quite a while, but eventually I got dropped and I almost made it through. I mean, it was an hour-long ride, and I made it through about 45 minutes, 48 minutes even. Today, though, I think I shouldn't have too much of a problem, and that's what this is, comparison's sake. Too much of a problem staying with this group for an hour. So far you can see this group is actually really well compact. There's a lot of leaders to help keep the group together. For my talk on F1, I wanted to take a look back at the 2020 season and kind of what I thought of the season, of the drivers, of the teams, and then also then talk about the 2021 season and make some predictions. Of course, we're a single race in, but it's definitely not too late to get your predictions in at this point, though I'm obviously going off of a little bit of extra data compared to the usual prediction video would be at this point. But again, it's just underway the season, so I definitely don't think it's too late to try to get that in. One track, one race is not going to accurately predict how the entirety of the season would go. And then finally I'll wrap up with a few of my biases, a few of my favorite drivers, teams, etc. Alright, so looking back on F1 2020, let's begin right from the top. Let's go with the teams that finished on top, and I'm going to go through the drivers and the teams themselves and how I think they did as a whole. Mercedes, of course, was dominant as always. Hamilton crushing Bottas this year. In the 2 years ago, Bottas was looking a little more on it, a little more competitive, a little tighter scrap with Hamilton. Not really pushing him, but doing just enough. This last year, that barely happened. Head-to-head, it was 12-4 for Hamilton. In qualifying was 11-5 to Hamilton, so pretty comfortable. That's just enough of a nudge from Bottas to keep Hamilton on his toes, but there really wasn't a consistent Bottas to really put much pressure on him. Average position for the year was 1.68 for Hamilton, 4.2 for Bottas. So clearly Bottas was a bit off a car that should be top 2 every race, and he just wasn't there. 11 wins for Hamilton, 2 for Bottas. He still got a couple wins. Only 1 DNF for Bottas, so surprising. Of course, Hamilton missed a race with COVID. Boy, was that an exciting race. But I would absolutely grade Hamilton an A. Not an A star, but an A. He just took care of business all season long. It was not the most phenomenal ride. He didn't completely put Bottas in his place, and he wasn't challenged much either. In terms of remaining potential for Hamilton, I'd give him a D. He seems to find a way to always get a little bit more every year. But one note on Hamilton is he had some issues with penalties last year. Some deserved, mostly not. I really, really think F1 is making a concerted effort right now, and other teams as well, helping in on this to hold back Hamilton and Mercedes as a whole. Bottas, though, C-, really poor, D+ on the potential. He's still relatively young. He should be getting better, I think, right now. I think he's finally starting to feel the impact. I think for the first 2 or 3 years driving alongside Hamilton, I think Bottas might have been accepting the fact that he's teammates with the best driver or one of the best drivers of all time. And I want to learn from him, and I can accept that. I think after X number of years, he's either A, realizing that, no, I'm never going to be what Hamilton is, or B, frustrated that he hasn't developed in the rate. And I think he actually got worse this last year and not better. So in terms of potential, I think D+.
if he gets in another seat somewhere, maybe he'll rebound, but I'm not sure that's going to happen either. I think Bottas might be in a little bit of trouble when he loses that Mercedes seat. Max Verstappen, 17-0 on the qualifying over Albon, 12-5 on the race results, and 5 DNFs are the 5 times that he didn't beat him. So he was 12-0 head-to-head. Average position 2.4, much better than Bottas. Really showing his worth. Really good year for Verstappen. Give him an A-. Potential, obviously still a B. And the reason why it's not higher is he's already getting pretty dang close to being, up there and being world championship quality. Right now, he's absolutely, if not one of the 2 best drivers on the grid, he's easily one of the 3 best drivers on the grid right now. His problem that he needs to overcome, though, DNFs, crashes. He's too aggressive. He does still make some mistakes. Albon, D. Just flat out. He had a really poor year. Average position, 7.75. There was only 1 DNF. But he was in a good car. He scored 105 points for Verstappen, doubled that at 214, despite having 5 DNFs in a 17-race season. Potential? I think Albon could certainly improve a lot. I think his move to Red Bull was way too early, and that is a car that is not terribly stable. And yes, we can make all sorts of excuses for Albon, and I think that Albon could be a good midfield driver. But I think it's also quite clear that he's never going to be a world champion, and him being without a seat in 2021, I like Albon, but it's not. He had his chance. I think he deserves 1 or 2 more years in F1 as a whole to try to prove himself, but he's had his chance, and he didn't take the opportunity. Down to Racing Point, Perez, 9-5 on the teammate battle, 9-5 on the qualifying battle. Average position, 6.5. Of course, had that amazing win, just 1 DNF. Missed 2 races, though. I'd give him a B, and not more. Yes, he had a win, and that's big. But in terms of potential, I'd put him at a C-. Perez, I think, was the most overrated driver in 2020. He was in a car that was capable of winning on its day, and it did. And it takes a good driver to make that happen. Don't get me wrong. He was a good driver. He is a good driver. Perez is a good driver. But to me, if I were to take 20 drivers and rank them in terms of quality, I would not put Perez in the top 10. And as the season went on, everybody looked at Perez and said, wow, he's doing so phenomenal. You know what? I think the car factor was not taking as seriously as it should have. There is absolutely no reason why that Racing Point did not finish 3rd in the Constructors. Yes, they had 15 points stripped from them, and if you add those points in, they would have finished 3rd. Despite that, it should have been comfortable. They should have been challenging Red Bull more than they did. They didn't really properly challenge Red Bull. They challenged Albon, but they were nowhere near Verstappen. And they should have been closer to those front 2 teams. And they should have had a more comfortable gap. The car was that good. Perez extracted a decent amount from the car. Enough so, he belongs in F1. And him losing his seat was like, ugh. Him getting a seat at Red Bull, to me, also cringeworthy. I don't think Perez belongs in that seat. And while I expect he'll do better than Albon did, I think Red Bull's still going to have a second driver problem. Not like it was, therefore they're going to kind of look the other way, but I still think there's going to be a pretty significant gap. It's not going to be 2-1 in point scoring, but I think Verstappen is going to be, it's going to be Hamilton and Bottas. It's going to be a distant number 2 driver. I'd probably put Perez around the Bottas category. We'll see how this year goes. Stroll, 5.9 on the teammate battle in an excellent car, earned a pole, which was pretty awesome, led most of that race, and absolutely fell apart. And that's where his season really fell apart. Stroll ended up 50 points behind Perez. 5 DNFs, quite a few of those were mechanical. Stroll, over the last 2 seasons, a lot of people have gone, wow, Daddy's little rich boy is actually doing okay. And you know what, I'm not totally buying that. He still has potential, C+, but I'd grade him a B- for the season. He's still not consistent. He disappeared very often, and again was in a car very capable, easily, of finishing in the top 6 each and every race, and often didn't. Often struggled to get into the points in a car that was much faster than those around him. However, I do think that Stroll could be looking at a good 2021 with the new teammate that he has. Come back to that one, though. Sainz and Norris. Sainz, 105 points, Norris 97, so yes, Sainz had an edge there, but this was a very, very close battle last season. Sainz 8-9, so Norris with a slight edge on that head-to-head battle. Also, Norris with slight edge on the quali battle. Good car. Definitely a good car. I think those two did extract the maximum out of that car, unlike Perez and Stroll, and hence ended up outscoring them as a team in the end. 3 DNFs for Sainz, 1 for Norris, so 4 combined. I'd give Sainz a B for the season. I'd give Norris a B as well. They were both consistent. They were definitely unspectacular, but they did well. Sainz, I'd give him a B- on his potential. Norris, still a solid B. I don't know if he's headed to be a world champion, but absolutely a solid upper middle of the pack, 7th to 10th best driver. Maybe could crack, 5th or 6th at some point as one of the better drivers that will stick around in F1 for a long time, like Sainz, who's kind of already there and already realized that potential. He'll still grow. He's still relatively young, but not like Norris. Down to Ricciardo and Ocon, 2-1 on the points. Ricciardo, of course, was second year in that car, 13-4 on the battle on track, 15-2 in quali to Ricciardo over Ocon. Ricciardo is a great driver. He is easily one of the top 5 in Formula One, and he absolutely gets the maximum out of that car. Ocon, yeah, okay, hit and miss. Ricciardo, B+ for the season. Not much potential left though, because he's 10 years in F1 and he's reached his peak, or just about anyway. Ocon, C for the year. A lot of people would give him an F. I would not. I don't think he was anywhere near that bad. That Renault was not a great car. Ricciardo's just a great driver. Ocon had been out of F1. First few races he struggled, but he settled in. And he did get a podium, right, in the end? He was only 1.5 positions off of Ricciardo as the season went on. So he didn't score a ton of points, but he wasn't that far behind. And with a very, very, very close, tight midfield, you could easily be 5 positions off somebody and still only be a matter of seconds down. I think Ocon was better than people said, and he still has high potential. And I actually could still see Ocon down the road. If Hamilton retires in, say, 3 years, I could see Ocon replacing him. And Russell being the one who moves in and replaces Bottas, say, next season. I think he's still got potential, but I think Russell's going to be that team leader and Ocon's going to be the number 2. But I think Ocon, his story is not done. He's just getting started. And he really didn't have that poor of a year. I think he was fairly average. All right, on to Ferrari. Leclerc, 98 points, 12-5 on the battle, but 4 DNFs. So he was only beaten once by Vettel. And that once was that was Leclerc's own doing. Vettel was following Leclerc around. Leclerc had every disadvantage and yet still beat Vettel and then got into off the racing line to make a pass, and then got some dirty tires, overcooked the brakes just a little bit, and ended up, instead of gaining the 1, losing 2, and finished directly behind, a tenth of a second off of Vettel, or 3/10, whatever it was, but right behind Vettel. And that was Vettel's only decent race of the entire year, so you kind of know where this one's going. Leclerc absolutely pummeled him. Qualifying 13.4. Car was not good. That's what happens when you cheat. You get busted for it. But that's also what happens when you're Ferrari and they just wipe it under the rug. Average position for Leclerc was 7 in a car that absolutely was not that good. Doubled Vettel's DNFs. One of those was definitely his own doing, pushing the car too hard. But again, he was getting the maximum out of a car that shouldn't have been scoring points, and yet his average finishing position was 7th. He scored a lot of points. He scored 98 of them. He beat a lot of midfield drivers with a car that wasn't as good. Leclerc is easily one of the top 5 drivers already, and he's still so young. And I can't stand Ferrari, but Leclerc is a phenomenal driver, and I really like him. I rate him very highly. I think A-, easy for Leclerc. Potential, still a B. He absolutely could compete for a world championship. Drove the wheels off that car. Vettel, F, period. F. 3.5 positions off his teammate. No excuses about the car. Formula One is the world's highest racing class. There's only 20 drivers. There are thousands and thousands of race car drivers and tens of thousands of go-kart or higher drivers. And only 20 make the world's highest racing class. There is no excuse for having a car that is difficult to drive and not being able to extract the most out of that car. Now, that is not to say that a Williams should be winning races. No, I get it. Mercedes is going to win a race. But if you are seated in the Williams, you drive it, and you drive the wheels off of it, and you get the most out of the car. And you do the same in a Ferrari or any other car on the grid. You extract the most out of it. Albon couldn't do that. That's why he lost his seat. Vettel couldn't do that. That's why he lost his seat. Average finished position was 10.4. 2 DNFs was all he had, and yet he still got his ass handed to him by Leclerc. 33 points was all Vettel scored. That was the most pathetic drive that I have seen in racing history. And I've been watching racing since I was a kid. I've only been watching F1 since the very start of the turbo hybrid era, but it was terrible. And I do not like Vettel. I have not liked Vettel, and yes, that is my bias. I already dislike him. But he was awful. He was truly, truly awful, and there is no excuse. His fans drive me up the wall how they just make excuse after excuse after excuse. Blame the team, blame Leclerc, blame anyone and everyone but the one who gave up and just was not trying. Vettel was not trying. And he's not gotten any better, as the one race so far this season would show. That was a truly awful weekend as well. He spun as much as Mazepin, did he not? Gasly, 75 points. Tight battle with Kvyat, 9-8. 12-5 on the qualifying, though. Gasly really rebounded well, considering his demotion from Red Bull. And then, of course, he gets the win. Circumstances, yes, but winning a race is winning a race, and that was still pretty impressive. 3 DNFs, and still massively outscored Kvyat, despite 3 DNFs. Grade B. Potential, though, C. Gasly's... I think he's pretty close to his peak. He's never going to be top tier. He's going to be mid-pack at best. I think he's a Grosjean, Magnussen, Perez type territory of he'll hang around for a number of years, or has the quality to hang around for a number of years, or he could go over to Formula E and compete, or go to IndyCar and compete for championships. Very good driver, but definitely not one of the best. Kvyat, just the 32 points. Mixed on the battle with Kaz, but aided by those few DNS. He was 2.5 points off, 2.5 finishing positions off of his teammate, and scored significantly less points. Kvyat, D+. And potential, D. I think Kvyat's on his way out of F1. Permanently, that is. I don't think we'll see him again. Raikkonen, Giovinazzi, each with 4 points, but Raikkonen 12-5 on the head-to-head. Qualifying, though, Giovinazzi really improved. He actually beat Raikkonen 9 times in qualifying this last season. Car was definitely off the pace, though. Their average finishing position was quite close, 13.6, 13.8. 3 DNFs for Giovinazzi. I think that's part of what put him off on the teammate head-to-head. Giovinazzi improved quite a bit. Raikkonen, another step backwards. He's really close to retirement age. He is definitely regressing. C- for him. Giovinazzi, though, still just a C-. He did develop a bit. I'll give him that. He still has some potential. I'll give him that. But he's still bottom end of the grid in terms of quality. Magnussen, Grosjean, poor season. 1 point for Magnussen, 2 for Grosjean. They both average finishing position 14.7. That Haas was just so slow. They were really still neck and neck as they have been. Grosjean, of course, so happy that he survived that crash and walked away. But really, the grade for both of them, D+. It was a bad year. They couldn't extract the best from the car. They got what the car could give them, but they couldn't get the most out of the car. They couldn't do what Leclerc was doing with a difficult-to-drive Ferrari. They both struggled, and they both just kind of sat at the back all season. And I think it's going to be even worse for the 2 Haas drivers this year. And yes, I'm happy Grosjean is alive, but it's still no excuse. People have been giving him high ratings. It's no excuse. Yes, he walked away from a major crash, and that's wonderful. He had a really bad year, period. Russell, Latifi, 3 points for Russell. Of course, that was in the Mercedes, but he absolutely drove the wheels off of the Mercedes that he was in for that one race. Should have won twice. So unlucky. Should have scored points in the Williams. Drove the wheels off of that thing. Yes, Mr. Saturday. Yes, he needs Sundays as well. So for that, only a B. He should have had a couple of points in that Williams. But he never would have been in that position if he wasn't having such phenomenal drives day in, day out. He was only 10-6 against Latifi on track, but I think that that came down so much to having some unlucky situations. Williams was all over the place tactically. They would always mix it up. Russell and Latifi were never on the same strategy ever throughout the season. And Russell often was the disadvantaged one. The strategy that they would put him on would end up putting him behind Latifi, and then there would be some sort of caution. Latifi had so much luck when it came to timing throughout the season. He was right place, right time, to where he would benefit from a full course, caution or VRC or whatever it was. He would benefit from it time and time again. Latifi was not good. Latifi was well off the pace. He's not a bad driver. He's going against a future world champion in George Russell, and I think Russell deserved more than he got, and I think Russell should have been in the Mercedes this year, and I think it would be appalling that he's not in the Mercedes next year. B for Russell, though, because, again, didn't capitalize on his couple chances, couple opportunities. But again, those opportunities wouldn't have existed if he wasn't so on it all the time, outside of those couple moments. A minus on the potential, too, for Russell, because I think he could potentially match Hamilton. I think he could be competing for Hamilton's records. He's going to have a hard time doing that with Verstappen and Leclerc on the grid. I think Ricciardo's going to be that next best behind those guys, who's going to get some wins and going to be the only other one competitive necessarily with them. Ocon can earn some wins eventually if he's in a Mercedes. Perez can pick up a few wins. I think Sainz can pick up a few wins, but I don't think those guys are going to be on the same level at all. Hamilton, of course, will retire eventually, but Verstappen, Leclerc, Russell, that's your future. Latifi, D+, potential C+. He'll certainly get somewhere, but I don't think a whole lot. I think we've kind of seen what Latifi has to offer. He's definitely like Giovinazzi, near the back of the grid. He was passed by Russell over and over again, and then those strategy calls then Russell would have to pit before Latifi and end up behind him, and then would have to repass him on track over and over and over again because of the team's strategy calls. 16-0 in quali says a lot. As for predictions this season, less detailed here. I think Hamilton is going to head to his next championship. I do not think that they're going to be that far off from Red Bull. However, I think we are in for a very tight battle with Red Bull, with Verstappen. I think Bottas could end up finishing 4th place in the points this season, and I think Hamilton is going to just nip Verstappen to the title. I think it's going to be very tight. Rule changes. The big one, obviously, coming for next year is targeting all the front field teams and the cost. However, I think all of the rule changes we've seen in the last 2 years, literally all of them, and all of the strange penalties we've seen in the last couple years where others have not been penalized. Ferrari, yes, they were slow. Is that penalty enough? No, it is not. I think all of the penalties have been directed at Mercedes and Mercedes alone. And finally, they have amassed enough slowdowns on Mercedes that Mercedes is not the quickest car. I think the Red Bull is. I think the Red Bull is almost comfortably quicker in certain areas. But I think the Mercedes is going to work hard, and they're going to figure it out. And I think the Mercedes will eventually beat and compete pretty evenly with the Red Bull. And when that happens, I think Hamilton's going to take it to Verstappen, and he is going to have the most fun that he has had in a long time. Because the last time that he was challenged was Rosberg. And I think that challenge was total BS. Rosberg took Hamilton out multiple times, should have amassed massive penalties for doing and then, of course, there was the luck factor. Hamilton had so many mechanical problems where Rosberg had virtually none. Everything went Rosberg's way that season, and he barely beat out Hamilton and really didn't deserve it. But he obviously challenged Hamilton in a way that Bottas hasn't at all. So, yeah, I mean, I'll give him that. Rosberg certainly wasn't a bad driver. He was a good driver, but he was not on Hamilton's level, and that title was so undeserved. With that being said, I'm a huge Hamilton fan. As a person, as a driver, as a black man who experiences tons of racism. Just, oh my goodness, the hate on Hamilton is so undeserved. He was young once, and he was a little reckless once, a long time ago in his career. But that was a long time ago. Verstappen is somebody who is still young and a little reckless and a little arrogant, and yet his fan base adores him, and people just hate on Hamilton like there's no tomorrow, and they hate on Mercedes like there's no tomorrow. And why isn't there that kind of hate on, say, Ferrari, which obviously I have, but why is Ferrari so loved even when they dominate, and yet another team comes along and dominates for a while in Red Bull, and they were loved? and then another team comes along and dominates for a while in Mercedes, and it's just hate, and especially hate directed at Hamilton. And why, right? If you compare the top drivers in terms of popularity in the sport, Hamilton, Verstappen, Vettel, Ricciardo. Verstappen has a pretty bad track record. He's getting better. He's maturing. Leclerc, he's humble, fairly. Vettel, not. Vettel has a serious attitude problem. Verstappen, spotty record. He's made some dumb moves. Ricciardo's lost his head a little bit, but he's a fun guy. He's a mature guy. He's a good guy. But he did lose it a little bit when he was teamed up with Verstappen, and Verstappen was starting to outperform him, and he struggled with that a little bit, but not too bad. Raikkonen, right? Largely popular. Obviously, career's waning and not there anymore. Alonso, oh my goodness, what a terrible person Alonso is. Yes, he's a great driver, but oh gosh, he's so arrogant. That arrogance drives me up the wall. I do not like arrogance. But Hamilton is none of those things. And he speaks up for major causes. He has donated so much time and effort in the right ways. And yet, despite all of that, there is just an insane amount of hate directed at him. Now, obviously, I live in the U.S. where we do have serious issues with racism. I don't know how much of it is because he drives for a big team. I don't know how much of it is because he's challenging Michael Schumacher's records. Oh, right. Michael Schumacher, by the way, was another person who was pretty bad with his behavior on track. Pretty arrogant in many respects. Not necessarily a great person. Yes, he was a really great driver, obviously, but I don't know, Get why there's that much hate directed at Hamilton. It just makes me wonder how much of that is tied to racism. But of course, it's a taboo topic, and I'm sure I'll be shunned in the comments, and maybe I'll even lose a couple subscribers. I hope that's not the case. But, that's life. It happens, and taking a backseat and not talking about the issues, I think, is needs to be a thing of the past. Can't be afraid to speak up. Hamilton deserves more respect than he gets, for sure. I think we're going to have that tight battle at the top. I do think that Perez is a good enough upgrade on Albon that he will challenge Bottas, but I don't think he's going to challenge Verstappen or Hamilton much. He might pick up a couple wins, like Bottas will pick up a couple wins, but that'll be about it. I think Racing Point's taken a big step backwards this year with the way the rules affected them and the way, of course, the rake rules have affected Mercedes and them. I think McLaren's going to be a clear number 3 this year. I think Ferrari's going to be a bit better, especially when they have a much better driver lineup this year than what they had last year. Alpine, they'll compete, but I think it's going to be tough. I think they'll figure it out, and they'll get right back into that midfield battle, though they didn't seem to be in that first week. AlphaTauri looks really good, really strong. They could be competing for a top 5. Alfa Romeo, I wasn't thinking that they were going to be great, but right now they're looking like they could have a pretty competitive car. They could be challenging that midfield fairly often. Williams is definitely better, and they're not far from that midfield, but I think they're still just a little bit off. And on his day, I think Russell's going to get some points this season. And then, of course, they're going to look like Williams from a couple of years ago. They're just going to struggle at the back. And then when you have Mazza spin, as he's been called, in one of those seats, that's going to make it that much worse. Last thing on the obvious bias, clearly I rate Vettel very low and much lower after last year, and I do not think that things are going to go any better for him this season. I think he's going to make Stroll look good. I think Perez made Stroll look good. I think because Perez is not as good as he is rated, and so I think that kind of helped lift things up for Stroll. Stroll is getting better, and I do think he's getting better. But I think Stroll actually could beat Vettel quite handily this season. And that's going to be the real end point for for Vettel. He might not even finish this season out if it goes as poorly as I think it could go. Or at least he'll retire at the end of this season if Stroll beats him at all, because Stroll's very much in the bottom 6 or 7 drivers. Again, better than he was, but still near the bottom. And now Vettel's going to be down there. And for him to be beat by Leclerc, who's rated as one of the best drivers, is one thing. For him to be beat by Stroll is a whole nother matter. And yeah, I think that could happen. Also, I don't think Alonso's going to necessarily do much this season, especially if the Alpine is a little bit off pace. I think Ricciardo could have a pretty solid year along with Norris, and I think their profile, their stock's going to raise. And I could see on the right day, right circumstances, I could see a McLaren grabbing a win. Either one of them, really. Ricciardo, of course, would be favored in that department, but that doesn't mean it's going to be him, because Norris is certainly capable.
Alright folks, well, clearly the first sprint was my most amazing ride yet. Most wattage, fastest, everything. I mean, it was phenomenal. And then second time through, I just rode through, still in recovery from that first effort. Third time through, I was kind of on the fence on whether I should go for it or not. I was at that point thinking every other would be good. I wasn't quite fully recovered yet from the effort, and I went for it anyway. I went flat out, and I was really feeling the watts the last 100 meters and started to let up, especially the last 50 or so. So I ended up just a half second off that time, but I dropped back, so at that point I just had to try to keep up. I wasn't ahead of the group, I was just with the group, and that combined with trying to recover just didn't happen. I ended up getting dropped, even though for a long time I was holding pace near the back at about 1.6, 1.7 watts per kilogram, which should have been enough to keep up with the group, but without aero, without some sort of tow with the group itself, it was just barely, not quite enough, and I just slowly drifted further and further back until finally I sat up a little bit to begin proper recovery, and that was it. Lost the group. Obviously this time through I was just cruising, and it was only 3.5 seconds slower than when I was in the peloton itself, so it really wasn't, drastically slower, but it was definitely slower, and that adds up, definitely adds up. So lost the group. The sweep group's actually now just a minute behind me, and I could absolutely get swept up by them and ride to the finish these last 18 minutes, but I've done my 2 hours for the week, and like I was saying at the beginning of the video, I have so much to do today and these next couple of weeks. So I'm going to go ahead and call that a day. Overall, successful ride, but not what I was hoping for. Too much too soon on that third effort. I should have saved it for the next lap. I'm Decathlon Gamer. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to hit that like button. I'll see you next time. Have a good one. Be safe out there. Bye for now.